Welcome to the second part in our 7-part series, Unpacking the Seven Hermetic Principles, based on the text known as the Kybalion, a study of the ancient wisdom school of the Hermetic philosophy in Greece and Egypt. I believe this text can provide a solid foundation, something of a jumping off point for those who are serious about the study of the occult and the practice of real magic in their lives. And I apologize from the start that my voice is a bit scratchy and rough today. I'm in the process of overcoming a mild case of walking pneumonia, and so thanks for bearing with me, and I will attempt to stay clear. I will attempt to enunciate clearly and keep the coughing to as much of a minimum as possible. So let's dive in. Today, as I said, we're talking about the second principle, which is the principle of correspondence. Now, if we look at the actual text itself, then we see that in the translation by Dennis Houck from the Emerald Tablet of Hermes, we see the text as that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. So what does that really mean? Well, the principle of correspondence basically says that our current reality is a mirror of what's going on inside of us. Our reality is the result of our innermost dominant serious thoughts and beliefs and what we call chaotic data. And the trick to really mastering this principle is understanding whether those thoughts, those beliefs, and that data that we have are accurate or simply based on our perceptions. So when we look at the principle of correspondence, it doesn't mean that if our lives are filled with unhappiness or chaos or just straight up unfulfilling circumstances, it's because that's how we are on the inside. It's not about placing blame. It's not about fault. See, metaphysics is not this what often gets passed off in the New Age community as metaphysics. It's to conceive of the fact that, well, if there was a shooting in a school or in a synagogue or a mosque, that it's a reflection of what's going on inside of us, and therefore we shouldn't be angry, we should be just working on ourselves. That is not metaphysics. That's ignorant New Age bullshit. There are books that are written that say otherwise. There are entire movements out there and metaphysical centers and churches and everything else that shame those who are poor, who are sick, who are abused, and I find that absolutely unacceptable and repugnant. When we read the words as within, so without, this principle really says that our current reality is a mirror of what's going on inside of us, plain and simple. If, for example, we suffer from low self-esteem, then our experience of the world around us is going to be interpreted through the lens of that belief system. If we believe that the world is a cold and hostile place, we tend to interpret our experiences through the lens of that belief as well. We worry that, I can't really be myself. I can't really tell someone what's going on inside me because the world doesn't care. See, that's reflected from a belief inside of us that the world is a cold and hostile place. But what happens if we choose to change those thoughts, if we choose to change those beliefs? Now, the fundamental premise of this principle is that each and every one of us are governed by a set of universal laws, universal principles. And when we're not operating in alignment with these laws, then nature has a way of course correcting us, of letting us know that we can, there's an opportunity there for us to adjust our mindsets, adjust our beliefs, or reevaluate those beliefs, and take a closer look at our actions. Our experiences aren't changed by placing blame. See, blame doesn't change the past, and it never creates a solution for the present moment. So in essence, when we place blame, we're actually trying to escape dealing with the root cause of suffering. And we see that a lot online. We see that when someone's response to tragedy, like a rape or the most recently the horrific shooting in those mosques in New Zealand, rather than taking ownership of our own feelings of not feeling safe, of feeling angry, of recognizing that that event was triggered by the hatred, the insolence, the xenophobia, and the white nationalism that comes from the current occupant of the Oval Office, a Russian operative whose sole purpose is to destroy freedoms within our country and to inspire that kind of unrest within the world so that his handler can then move in and control everything. See, when we're trying to avoid dealing with that reality, then it's easy for us, and much easier than to feel the pain, to just say, oh, well, that's what's happening inside of us. That's just a reflection of what's happening. No, inside of you is not going into, hopefully, there's not a reflection of a desire to go into a synagogue or a mosque or a church or a school and shoot people up. Now, within you, there might be a belief that the world is an unsafe place. And so when these kinds of horrible actions take place, they may trigger those fears and bring them to the surface. And that is an opportunity for you to really take a close look at your beliefs and really examine what it is that makes me believe that this world is not a safe place. And what can I do to change that? See, that's what the New Age fluff and unicorn nonsense is missing. They don't take that final step. They're all about the idea that their experience, that their mission is only to think happy unicorns and rainbow thoughts, and to just say, whatever's not love is fear, and fear isn't real, and so fa la 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 la. No. Even the Course in Miracles says whatever is not love is fear, but then guides us in taking the steps to ensure that we can correct the perceptions, fix the cause of those fears. And one of the most effective ways to eliminate fear is to confront the reality that's placed before us, that's reflecting in our experiences, and say, what can I do to ensure that this never happens again? What can I do to ensure that I'm doing my part to alleviate suffering when things like this happen? See, what the New Age fluffernutters miss is that chaotic data can cloud the lens through which we interpret these experiences. And it's okay with them because, let's face it, most of us don't want to have to be that uncomfortable. So what do we mean when we say correspondence? What is it that we're referring to? Well, the principle tells us that there is a direct correspondence between spiritual laws and the manifestation of phenomenon. There are planes beyond our knowledge which exist. But when we understand universal principles, it places us back in our own power. So we may not know all of the various planes that exist in the multiverse. But if we can understand a universal principle, then we can take back the responsibility. And we can assume 100% responsibility for our lives, not for the lives of anyone else. And the principle of correspondence enables us to reason intelligently from within the microcosm to the macrocosm and then back again. We recognize that if this is going on inside of us, this is going on in the big picture. If it's going on in the big picture, it's going on inside of us. What happens above happens below. What happens within happens without. So when we understand that principle and we take it in a way that is more holistic and that is healthier and spiritually mature, it doesn't matter what we change on the outside. if we haven't done the work to change the inside. Our reality is going to continue to reflect those things that are going on that are unresolved within us. And it will begin to reflect those things that are resolved within us as well. See, you can't have A equals B and B equals C and A not equal C. Now, I'm not a mathematician, so I might have completely screwed that up in my head. I understand what I'm trying to say to you is it can't be true that what's going on inside of us is being reflected outside of us only when things are bad. And it can also not be true that if we change those thoughts so that those beliefs that we hold, the chaotic data is released and replaced with something better, it's impossible for our experience of life not to reflect that as well. Now we're going to continue to talk about that because that gets misinterpreted so often. Only when we shift within ourselves can our experiences evolve to become a reflection of new inner beliefs and a worldview. And that begins at a subtle level. While this universal principle works on all planes for all persons and all beings equally, it does not mean that it's someone's fault if something goes wrong. See, within this universal principle, we have to understand that while it works on all planes for all people equally, while this principle is in effect, it doesn't mean that if something goes wrong, it's your fault. The person born in poverty in Appalachia did nothing wrong to create those circumstances. The person living on the streets in India did nothing wrong. They're not to blame for being born into that status in life. The person who's sexually assaulted didn't get raped because they thought poor thoughts, and someone who dies from cancer or is suffering from cancer didn't lack the right belief or power or skill to cure themselves. They didn't get cancer because their beliefs were to blame, but their experience of cancer had everything to do with an opportunity for them to address that belief system. Now, I can tell you firsthand that as somebody who's been raped, as somebody who, as a result of that rape, has ended up with AIDS, I can tell you that I take 100% responsibility for everything that happens in my life. That doesn't mean I was to blame for being raped. It means that I take responsibility for the period of time after that violent attack when I became so uncaring for myself, so hostile toward myself, that I began abusive behavior. And that made my health worse. That made my relationships worse. That made my experience of life worse. But on the same token, when I had the great opportunity to meet Dr. Louise Hay, the late metaphysician who really was the first one to say, what if AIDS really meant anger incorrectly directed at the self, and you worked on the anger, how would your experience of this disease change? And then years later, as I began to spiritually mature, and only because I did the work earlier, was I ready to let go of Louise Hay, because there's a limit that teachers can bring us to sometimes. And what I was feeling in that situation was that she was telling people that if their disease wasn't getting better, they weren't doing the work. And I watched a friend of mine die with Kaposi sarcoma, not from the sarcoma itself, but from suicide, because he believed he was to blame for his disease progressing. And that's just bad science, that's bad metaphysics, and that's an horrific injustice. And so because that no longer resonated with me, I moved on, but also because I had that foundation and that incredible experience with her, it led me to meeting my root teacher, who for decades after that would become the one to help me learn how to peel off the layers of that onion. And so Ma Jaya Sati Bhagavati became a teacher for me that helped me take those next steps in my own spiritual evolution, my own maturing. See, this principle is designed to be not to be used as a justification for New Age ableism, which is something that is absolutely repugnant, or for the ego-driven desire to appear more spiritually evolved because someone lacks the commitment to stand up for social justice principles, or they worry that if they stand up for inequality, or they stand up against racism, or they stand up against homophobia, they're going to lose followers on Facebook or Instagram, or they're not going to be able to sell their multi-level marketing products, or they're not going to be the popular one in school or church or in their neighborhoods. Political neutrality might sell more books. It might make those tapes and workshops fly off the shelf, but it's definitely not a sign of an evolved mind or spiritual maturity. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So as I was putting this program together today, I couldn't help but think of something that a dear old friend whom I met through Louise Hay once wrote. And that was Dr. Wayne Dyer wrote, "When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change." See, when you realize it, you feel the power of that moment. And so how does this principle affect us or apply to us as practitioners of magic, as sorcerers, mages, witches, pagans, metaphysicians of every stripe? Well, let's talk about that. I think there are three major takeaways. The first is that magic is nothing if not learning to work with your beliefs, your thoughts, and energies to live in greater harmony with nature and with the cosmos. As above, so below, as within, so without. As witches and sorcerers, we don't change anything, nor do we place and ascribe blame. We work with the energy around things, around circumstances, beliefs, situations, and we create an atmosphere in which our desires are the change that we want to see in that circumstance can occur. So we work with energy. We don't manipulate people. We don't manipulate hearts. We don't manipulate situations. But we work with the energy around those situations. And when we say that, what we're really talking about is we change within ourselves our understanding of the potentiality that exists there, our understanding of the possibility that exists there. And then that energy begins to take root and create subtle shifts around those circumstances. And the more we practice, the more we're able to have the influence of benefiting or course correcting or adjusting the energy around circumstances which are otherwise undesirable. As a result, we start to manifest things more. And the third thing I think that's really important is we have total and complete control over only one thing in our life, and that is our thinking. And learning to work with that principle is where your personal power begins. So for me, this second principle of Hermetics is very important because it gives us the understanding that these things that begin, that we heard last week, begin in our mind, have a correspondence in the physical world around us. And that brings us to the point of beginning our power. I think we may be about to see a St. Patrick's Day parade start at the end of my program. Hopefully not. But we're at the point now where it is our turn to decide what we do with this information. It's time for you, the viewer, to personally consider if this material, the ideas and the beliefs and philosophies of others resonate with you so that you can draw your own conclusions. See, I don't recommend that you take anything we say in any of these classes to be gospel truth or carved in stone. See, it's the point of power is when you learn that real magic isn't about gaining power over others. It's about gaining power and insight over yourself. So you take this information I've shared with you over the last 20 minutes and you see if it resonates with you. And you use it as a jumping off point for your own spiritual evolution. That's my hope for each and every one of you as you take these weekly reflections, which have a tendency, admittedly, to be somewhat dry, somewhat academic, not so much fun. But that's why we don't do these topics on the brew. Because the brew is meant to be a community building experience and is meant to be fun. And while once in a while we have to bring up topics that might be a little uncomfortable, that might be a little bit, less savory, if you will, as a community, we love one another. We enjoy the interactions. We enjoy the diversity of perspective and belief. And that's what the brew is all about. But these Sunday afternoon Inner Alchemy programs are really just about helping those who are just beginning to set their foot on the path to understand some of the principles that they'll encounter so that they don't get caught up in sort of the make-believe version of what metaphysics are. And for me, and I know this is probably not the most popular thing I'll say, but get used to it. For me, New Age is that sort of pop magic, pop culture, unicorns and rainbows bullshit path that serves a purpose, absolutely, for those who aren't really ready to take 100% responsibility, for those who need to go to somebody who tells them that they're a healer, and who believes that that person is the healer, rather than understanding that that person, as we heard a couple weeks ago when we had Robert Ray on the program talking about how working with the vital life energy, vital life force energy, that they unlock the person who's come to them for treatments innate ability for that energy to begin to course correct and for that body to heal itself. That they are the facilitators of that process because they recognize that there is no difference between me and you. And so I want to bring that back to the current day, to the current situation that we find this week, the tragic loss of 50 lives and the possibility of several more deaths coming in the New Zealand white Christian nationalist terrorist attack upon those mosques. And so I want to sort of reflect on the fact that this isn't about placing blame. This is about recognizing who was responsible for encouraging and inciting that violence. But it's not enough to say we recognize that Donald Trump inspired and even incited the kind of violence that occurred. It's not enough to say that that gun reform laws are going to be one of the biggest steps we can take to begin the process of ending this kind of violence. What we have to do now is take action. We have to come together as a community. We have to recognize that it's not the violence itself that is a reflection of something within our consciousness. It's a reflection of a belief that allows violence to occur. That belief that we're not safe. That belief that there are others out there who would do harm to us. And understands that within the eyes of that horrific terrorist whose name I will never speak, within that person's heart was a feeling of insecurity, of being less than, couched in the world of white supremacy. Every white supremacist is a coward. Every white supremacist has major low self-esteem, starting with the orange man in the Oval Office. They recognize that they are inferior in the presence of people from different cultures with different skin colors. In the case of the Cretan in the Oval Office, recognizing that people whose skin colors naturally have more melanin and are much more beautiful shades than orange, is somebody who is deeply wounded, deeply self-loathing, and as a result has to attack anyone, as we've seen in the media, who is more intelligent, including fifth graders, sixth graders, anyone who has more integrity, anyone who has lived a principled life, and who says accountability ought to be the first step in leadership. And so when that person goes into the world with those beliefs, there is a violence toward themselves, and that violence manifests to others. But the point of power for you and for me is to recognize that we do not need to operate from a place of fear, that we do not need to operate from a place of division and separation. We do not need to operate from a place of victimhood, and that we can come together and we can begin to heal and we can build a stronger community, not just in our homes, not just in our local communities, but in the world. And so that is the principle of correspondence, recognizing that when I do the work within, when I take responsibility for the work within, then it is a natural progression of that principle for me to go into the world around me and speak my truth. That's what we mean when we say speaking our truth to power. Because when we go into the world and we speak our truth, when we go into the world and we say, this is fucked up, we do not accept the idea that violence is the only way through this experience of life. When we do that, we're taking back our power. And that, for those of us that are on the pagan spiritual path, those of us who are witches, those of us who are sorcerers and mages, and those who are anything and everything in between, that is the first step upon the path of recognizing that this spiritual practice is real, but it's only real to the degree that we're willing to put it into action. See, I can't conceive of the people out there who are more concerned with selling books or tapes or workshops so that they shy away from taking a stand and would rather support ridiculous ideas that this was a false flag operation, and that this was the liberals who decided that they were just going to make Trump look bad, that they were going to make white supremacists look bad. We don't have to do anything to make white supremacists or Donald J. Trump look bad. Ladies and gentlemen, turn on the television, read a newspaper or a magazine. They already do look bad because they are bad. And if you're afraid to take a step for social justice, to stand up to these kinds of lies, then you don't deserve to sell your books or your tapes or your workshops. You're not a spiritual leader, you're a charlatan. And with that, I'm going to end today's program. I'm losing my voice clearly, and so I want to thank each and every one of you who watches these programs. I look forward to your comments in the comment section below, both during the live broadcast and afterward. I will stick around here to do my best to follow up with questions as they come in and come along. And I appreciate the fact that you guys understand that I am doing this broadcast from bed, and therefore I was not going to torment you with video footage of what's going on in terms of my hair and my attire, because the message was too important for me to put off another day. So I hope this has been something that helps you to think, that helps you. If you felt yourself pushing back at anything you heard today, ask yourself why. Ask if it was because it simply wasn't true, or if it was because it struck a nerve and you were uncomfortable. As always, I encourage you to stay in the moment. That's where the point of power is. And in the present moment, there can be no fear. In the present moment, there can be no belief that we're not safe, because we are always safe in that present moment. In that present moment, we can find gratitude for this precious incarnation, this lifetime, which gives us an opportunity to cultivate these spiritual truths and to recognize in all things that the best is yet to come. Thanks for being with us these past 31 minutes. This is Dr. John Michael Silva.